All right, everybody, welcome to the show. I got an awesome one for you today. You're going to have to bear with me a little bit because I've been awake for maybe 2 or 3 hours. I haven't eaten anything. I'm at the studio in DC, and I went to the cabinet to look for food, and I found all I had was saltine crackers. And so the package was open, so I was kind of like, this is sketchy. It could be super stale. I mean, these crackers might be from 1997. I take a bite. Not only are they stale, they are literally the stalest crackers I've ever had in my life. It was like wet cardboard in my mouth. But then the other disturbing part of this experience is that the crackers actually tasted like detergent because there was detergent next to the crackers in the cabinet and it just like seeped into the cracker. So anyway, I took like 2 bites and then immediately spit it out. But it's okay because then I found some other crackers. And I was like, well, these, I'm sure, are not going to be as stale as the others. And I took one of those, had a bite. It was just as stale as the saltines, and it also tasted like detergent. So my breakfast this morning was wet cardboard soaked in detergent, and I'm currently undergoing some toxic shock as we speak. I don't know how I'm still conscious, but nonetheless, we're going to power through the show because that's how we roll. So I got an awesome show for you today. I'm going to outline for you Joe Biden's fatal flaw. He made some comments on the Supreme Court, and suffice to say, he just totally missed the big picture in the most egregious way possible. So we'll talk about that. Sneeko potentially came out of the closet. For those of you who don't know, he's like a red pill, manosphere type dude. And then we also have later on in the show, the younger generation, people age 18 to 34, are reporting that they are not at all proud of America. I want to give you the breakdown in the numbers, but young people, middle-aged people, older people, and what they think of their country. And then also later on, Donald Trump goes after Joe Biden and basically accuses him of being a cokehead. So it's fun. It'll be fun. It'll be fun. All right, so we'll jump into it in a second. Everybody knows the shameless plugs. Do me a big favor if you haven't yet. Click like, click subscribe. We recently crossed that 1 million subscriber threshold. And I'm not going to lie to you guys. My goal is to stay ahead of my wife over at Breaking Points. So they also recently passed that 1 million subscription mark. And I love her to death. And I support her. And I hope she, has tremendous milestones that she reaches going forward. But let's keep it real. I would like to be a little bit ahead of them in the sub count. So do me a big favor. It's something like 20 or 30% of you guys that watch this channel that don't subscribe. Doesn't cost you anything. Helps us out massively. Helps us in the algorithm. Also, click that bell icon so you get a notification every single time a video drops. And please consider supporting the show either on Patreon, link in the video description box below, or use that YouTube thanks button to tip. Remember, I've never had a conversation with an advertiser. I'm very proud of that fact. So we like to build this through small dollar donations. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into this here. So President Biden went on MSNBC. Now, the main, thing that happened that people are responding to in this interview is that it kind of awkwardly ended, and he got up and casually wandered out while the cameras were still rolling. And it was kind of goofy. It was kind of silly looking. It was kind of sad. He clearly doesn't know what's going on. He's an old man. We could state the obvious here. I mean, everybody agrees to all those things, right? But that's what was getting most of the attention. But this part of the interview, to me, is way more concerning. In fact, that other moment is just a classic Joe Biden moment now. And if anything, I'm giggling at it. Listen to what he says about the Supreme Court, and then I'll break it down for you.
Do you worry that without court reform, this conservative majority is too young and too conservative, that they might do too much harm?
Well, I think they may do too much harm. But I think if we start the process of trying to expand the court, we're going to politicize it maybe forever in a way that is not healthy.
That you can't get back.
That you can't get back. And I think, I think maybe it's just the optimist in me. I think that some of the court are beginning to realize their legitimacy is being questioned in ways that hadn't been questioned in the past. And I think there's a concern on some, maybe even the Chief Justice, that maybe maybe we better.
Well, in the independent legislature's decision, it looks like maybe Roberts had that in mind.
I don't know that.
I don't either, but you could. The optimist could hope so,
The
right?
optimist hopes so.
So here's what's really frustrating about this clip. He says, if I take action to try to rein the court in, then we're going to politicize it maybe forever in a way that we can't get back. That's his argument. What's the problem with that? The problem is, hey, Joe, it is already politicized. Everything is politicized. Don't buy the PR line, the marketing line of, who, us, bro? We're like totally above politics and stuff. We're just calling balls and strikes. We're just like straight shooters who are giving the plain face reading of the law and the Constitution. We're not even political, bro. We're not even political, bro. Joe, they struck down your student debt reduction. There was recently a case where they came out on the pro-corruption side involving Andrew Cuomo's aides in New York. The facts of that case, by the way, are egregious. We covered it. You should go take a look at it. But the bottom line is, homeboy stepped away from the Cuomo administration or Cuomo campaign, literally took bribes, then went back to the Cuomo campaign to deliver on said bribes. But the Supreme Court said, hey, since when you took the bribe, you technically weren't in the same position at the campaign, therefore, it's not a bribe, and corruption is actually totally cool. I'm not kidding about this, guys. That was an astonishing case. They overturned Roe versus Wade with the Dobbs decision, a deeply, deeply unpopular move. They just limited affirmative action. They cracked down on unions by allowing employers to sue them, which could cripple unions moving forward. There's been corruption scandal after corruption scandal involving the justices themselves. Detailed reporting on that. Shout out to ProPublica, who did a phenomenal job getting into all the specifics and the nooks and crannies. Joe, it is already a politicized court. This is like saying in the heart of the Lochner era, well, I wouldn't want to fight back because then, maybe we'll be politicizing the court in a way that we can't get back. No, it's already political, and you have no choice but to counter that with politicizing it in your own way, unless you don't really care about the things you claim to care about. And the other idea that's I can't get out of my mind is there's this argument that's embedded in his point here, which is it would kind of be un-American or crossing a line for me to do these things that the left is telling me to do, whether it's pack the court or term limits or whatever. And the fact of the matter is, it is actually deeply American for when the court oversteps, the president fights back and puts them in check. So I went back and read the history on this the other day. There was a great article in the Smithsonian Magazine about this. FDR basically drafted a plan to pack the Supreme Court. And this was at a time when FDR, peak of his popularity. I mean, the guy won 4 elections. There was a time when he had 80% of the Senate and 80% of the House. And then you also had Republicans who were like, I will bend to your whim because you're way too popular and I can't fight you. So the dude had it on lock. He had a plan to pack the Supreme Court, and he was going to do it. In fact, he had a meeting with the Supreme Court justices where they were all smiles and giggles and sipping champagne and a lovely chat. And then a couple days later, he declared war on the Supreme Court. And what happened? He scared the shit out of them into them getting their ass in line. Because like you said, if Roberts is strategic, and to some extent he is, he would realize the legitimacy of the court is in question here. And, that we need to do something to prevent the decline in legitimacy. So what happened during the FDR era? Well, before FDR cracked down on them, there was a case coming out. I forget the state that it was coming out of, but it was basically a state minimum wage case. And the court struck down a state's minimum wage and said it's unconstitutional for the state to do minimum wage. Well, then after FDR declared war, there was another state minimum wage case that came to them, and they go, this is actually totally constitutional, bro. I don't even know what you're talking about, bro. FDR scared them. They were going to rule that the Social Security Act was unconstitutional. FDR scared their asses into going, actually, this is actually totally constitutional, bro. The crisis we were facing at the time, people don't remember this, but there was fear that the Supreme Court would slap down literally every single piece of positive legislation from FDR and the Democrats that gave us a good social safety net and jobs programs, etc. So the American thing to do was, hey man, I got to check your ass. You're overreaching. You're judicial tyrants. You're judicial authoritarians. And I'm not going to allow it. And it worked. Now, the other point to make, which again, you got to be a student of history to read up on this stuff, Abraham Lincoln went even further than FDR. So here they say in a Jacobin article how Abraham Lincoln fought the Supreme Court. In 1857, a Southern majority Supreme Court ruled in Dred Scott v. Sanford that Scott had no legal right to bring suit in federal court because he used to be a slave. That, in Chief Justice Roger Taney's famous words, colonial and U.S. history showed that black Americans, quote, had no rights which the white man was bound to respect. Let me repeat that. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court at the time said, and I quote, black Americans had no rights which the white man was bound to respect. Now, if I use Biden's logic, back in this era, I go, look, man, I want to fix the problems. I want to fight back against it, but I don't know what you want me to tell you. I don't want to politicize the court in a way that's going to maybe ruin it forever. No, the point is they are ruining it forever. When you say something so egregious like that, you are ruining it forever, and you are the ones being political. Biden still doesn't get it. They continue. Equally inflammatory was the court's ruling that Congress had no constitutional right to ban slave property in the federal territories. This decision outlawed the national platform of the anti-slavery Republican Party, which was premised on blocking slavery's expansion to the West. Slaveholders and their allies, including Democratic President James Buchanan and the overwhelmingly Democratic U.S. Senate, embraced the decision as a final settlement of the slavery question. Taney had proclaimed Dred Scott, quote, the law of the land. Have we heard that before? And the ruling party in government agreed with him. Abolitionists like Frederick Douglass, meanwhile, condemned the decision as the judicial incarnation of wolfishness. Yet they knew the problem of pro-slavery jurisprudence could not be solved by anti-slavery jurisprudence alone. Quote, we can appeal from this hell-black judgment of the Supreme Court, said Douglass, to the court of common sense and common humanity. The remedy for Dred Scott did not reside in a lawyer's plea or a judge's opinion, but in mass political struggle. For the Republican Party, that struggle meant declaring political war on the idea of an all-powerful judiciary. After 1857, Republicans responded to Dred Scott, as the historian David Potter wrote, not with an attack on the decision, but an attack on the court. Guys, that's super important. I need you to understand this argument. This is everything hinges on this right here. So they're saying, yeah, you can nibble around the edges. You could say, but I think my interpretation of the law is correct, so you should go with my interpretation of the law. Or you could call bullshit on the entire charade and say, no, you know what? The entire court is illegitimate with how much they're overstepping and how tyrannical they're being. And that's where you get the justification, legitimate justification, to say, nope, it's time for term limits. You know, it's time for using judicial stripping procedures, which Congress can do, which says the court can't rule on X, Y, or Z. You know, it's time to pack the court or whatever. You have to question the premise of the Supreme Court, this almighty, all-powerful institution, which is just being straight shooters and calling balls and strikes and looking at the legitimacy from a constitutional perspective. Nonsense. They are Federalist Society goons who are deeply ideological and political, and they dress it up in legalese and pretend like, well, my decision is above reproach. Thank you very much. Okay, I want to give you one more, though. We read this on the show the other day, but I feel like it's super important. So this is from, I believe, let me make sure. Yeah, this is a quote from Lincoln. He said, quote, if the policy of the government upon vital questions affecting the whole people is to be irrevocably fixed by decisions of the Supreme Court, the instant they are made, the people will have ceased to be their own rulers, having to that extent practically resigned their governance into the hands of the eminent tribunal. In other words, let's not pretend you are, a fundamental piece of democracy. Let's call it what it is. You are oftentimes anti-democratic, and democracy should step in and check your ass. Once in power, Lincoln and congressional Republicans reorganized the federal judiciary and packed the court, adding an additional justice in 1863. More fundamentally, though, they simply ignored the pro-slavery precedents established in the 1850s. Now, is there anybody today who would argue this was incorrect of Abraham Lincoln to do? You didn't follow the proper process and procedures and the checks and balances, and you overreached and you were authoritarian. Is there anybody who will look you in the eyes today and say that the process arguments override the moral and human rights arguments of Abraham Lincoln saying, we're just going to ignore you because being pro-slavery is not okay? They continue. In June 1862, for instance, Congress passed and Lincoln signed a bill banning slavery from the federal territories, a direct violation of the majority ruling in Dred Scott. They just ignored the court. The court meekly acquiesced. Would you look at that? Wait a second. They're a paper tiger? Is that what you're telling me? They meekly acquiesced, recognizing that his political power was long since broken. So in other words, why don't you go ahead and stop me with your army? Oh, that's right. You don't have an army. Oops. I guess you're going to have to go along with what we do. Now, guys, how does this translate into today? Well, for example, on the Supreme Court, on the student loan debt case, what should Biden do? Well, he did, to his credit, he did say, okay, you're slapping it down this way. It's nonsense, but whatever. Now we're going to do the same thing via the Higher Education Act, which is crystal clear that it allows me to do what I want with the debt, or the Secretary of Education to be more specific. Because, by the way, 92% of student loan debt is held by the federal government. They can do whatever they want with that. So all you have to do is, I'm doing the Higher Education Act. Apparently under, the new regulations rule, you have to have a 30-day minimum comment period on this. So do the comment period. That's what they're doing. But then at the end of it, just say, gotcha, and wipe the debt slate clean. Just do it. Now, in that case, if it goes through the court process, right, if there are cases over it, which there definitely will be, and it goes from one court to another and eventually gets to the Supreme Court after all the appeals, the Supreme Court might say, we disagree, you don't have the authority to do this, which, by the way, they might not say that, because the plain-faced reading of it is overwhelming in this instance. I mean, to say that you can't do that would honestly be comical. But if they were to say that, and you're Biden, you turn around and go, well, okay, I mean, I'd love to help you out, but it's gone. The debt is gone. We erased the debt. There is no process or procedure by which we can get that debt back. Now, if you want to go ahead and take the reins of power and try to figure out the administrative mechanisms to return the debt, by all means, you're more than likely, I am complying with you, but what do you want me to tell you? It's over. It's done. And then what happens? You know what will happen? They will, quote, meekly acquiesce, recognizing that its political power is broken because they have no other plays. So this is what Biden has to do. Will he do it? I doubt it. But that's the path, man, and it's crystal clear. And the benefit of this also is this isn't as difficult a fight as FDR had, and this isn't as difficult a fight, certainly, as Abraham Lincoln had. This is actually a much lower level fight. And you have seen hints of Roberts being like, well, we can't overreach here, we can't overreach there because we're going to go too far. They have a 29% approval rating right there. They are begging for a political counterattack. Give it to them. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.